Hello, I'm Catherine and I'm a history teacher, and this short video is to help all history applicants write their personal statements. Now, if you're like a lot of the people who I've taught over the years, you might have spent quite a long time already staring at a blank page, too intimidated to get going writing your personal statement. So if that's you, then hopefully this might get you started. One of the reasons why people find it so intimidating is it's actually very difficult to put it into words why you want to study history, why you like history, and also some people are secretly hoping for a killer phrase, an absolutely amazing first sentence that's just going to wow those tutors into giving you a place. It's also very important to bear in mind that what you put on your personal statement will very much influence your interview. So if you're going to face an interview, if you're applying for Oxford or Cambridge in particular, then you've got to pay a bit of attention to that as well. So hopefully this video will help you get started. So why should we, for now, forget the first sentence? Well, one good reason for this is that first sentences are often a great temptation to be pretentious, and this is what you really want to avoid. So we as history students are often hyper aware of those moments in history where somebody's use of some sublime phrase or somebody's fantastic metaphor or profound statement changes the course of history. Well, often it doesn't as much as we like to think, but this is often what we're aware of. And, you know, we're thinking of those moments like I have a dream, or give me liberty or give me death, or we will fight them on the beaches. But the point here is that you're not trying to buoy a nation to fight on against desperate odds or highlight some horrible injustice and stir people's hearts. You're not trying to move those tutors to tears. You're actually writing something that's quite a functional document, and you're certainly going to make yourself look silly if you try and somehow pinpoint the essence of history as your first sentence of your personal statement. Remember your audience, you're addressing history academics who have been studying history probably for years and have lots of ideas themselves about what the essence of history is. So I don't think they'll take very kindly to an 18-year-old trying to tell them what the essence of history is. Instead, we need to just think about being a bit more straightforward, really. I've taught a lot of very lovely people over the years, very ordinary, nice, sensible people, and when I read the first draft of their personal statement, often I just seem to think this can't have been written by them. It seems much more pretentious than they are. They seem to have turned into some great egotist. And actually, when I explain this, they're usually relieved to hear that they don't have to come over as someone else. They can come over as them. A more academic version of them, maybe, but they don't have to use very highfalutin language. They don't have to use words like enthralled or enticed or anything that makes you cringe. So forget all of that for the moment. Forget your first sentence. I promise you we'll come back to it, but first we need to do some planning. First you need a rough sheet of paper to start some planning. Now, the place to start is to think about all the topics in history that you've studied over the years that have most grabbed your attention, that you feel most confident to talk about, and that you feel most inspired to do a bit of extra reading in. So make a list of the topics that you've most enjoyed discussing in class, debating, writing essays on, or reading about. Let's say you really enjoyed doing the Lutheran Reformation, the Bolshevik Revolution, Elizabethan foreign policy, and you enjoyed Vietnam when you were doing GCSE. And let's say you're also really enjoying your NEA, which for the sake of argument we'll say is about abolitionism in the American Civil War era. Now, the first thing that would strike a tutor about these as topics to discuss potentially in interview is that they're very, very broad. So the Lutheran Reformation is way too broad as a topic to discuss, and that what will single you out from other A-level applicants is perhaps putting something a bit more specific. So it may be that you're particularly interested in the Lutheran Reformation in the towns, the dissemination of Luther's ideas, maybe even something more specific, the role of itinerant preachers, say, in the spreading of Luther's message. When it comes to the Bolshevik Revolution, it might be that you really enjoyed reading about the mood on the streets of Petrograd on the eve of revolution. All that looks much better, it looks more genuine and more specific than just the Bolshevik Revolution, which is an enormous topic for study. It may strike you that that seems a bit narrow, but most tutors that will be reading your personal statement will also be supervising PhD students whose topics for study are a lot narrower than that. So what seems to you narrow doesn't necessarily seem very narrow to them. So let's say you want to do the Lutheran Reformation, spread of his ideas in the towns, and the role of itinerant preachers. Bolshevik Revolution, the Elizabethan foreign policy is a bit narrower, but it's still a little bit too broad, so maybe something like the role of the Puritans in shaping Elizabethan foreign policy. Now, when it comes to Vietnam, you may have studied this at GCSE and remember loving it. I would be a little bit careful with a topic that you loved at GCSE, because what the tutors won't know is that you've studied this at GCSE rather than A-level, and you'll be competing against people who potentially studied Vietnam for A-level and will therefore have a much more in-depth and sophisticated knowledge of it than you do. Obviously, if you're doing your NEA on some aspect of the Vietnam War, then yes, great, then that's absolutely fine. Or if you've had a very long-term interest in it and have read absolutely loads about it, then again, that's fine. But if it was just remembering, oh, I loved that at GCSE, I probably wouldn't do that one. Now the NEA, I think that's a very good thing to put down. Also, perhaps if you're doing EPQ on a historical topic, then that might be something to put down as well. I would probably stick to 4, because in my experience of helping people over the years, any more than 4 risks spreading you too thinly. So what you're going to have to do in the time between now and the interview, if you get an interview, is you're going to have to read up a lot on these topics. And if you've covered too many topics, if there are 10 topics on this list, then you've bitten off more than you can chew in terms of preparation. So 4 I think is about right. 3 is probably too narrow. It makes you look a bit too, just too narrow as a history student, makes you look like your interests aren't broad enough. So I would choose 4, and I would choose them from a variety of eras or geographical locations. And that gives you about the right amount of material to prepare for the interview. So when you've chosen your 4, let's say we're going with these 4, and this is the abolitionists. Then the next stage would be to think of lots of books, articles, podcasts, documentaries, lectures you've been to on each of the 4 different topics. So make lists clustered around each of your 4 topics. And here you have to be, again, quite careful about what to include and how much to include. So if you're going to list 50 different books, well, there probably won't be room on the personal statement, but you're really going to have bitten off more than you can chew then. So I would say probably about 2 or perhaps 3 per topic, because you're really going to have to know those books, those lectures, podcasts, documentaries, because if you write them on the personal statement, then they're fair game for you to be asked about in the interview. So you have to think quite carefully, try and think about the articles or books or podcasts or documentaries that you most want to talk about in the interview, that you're most likely to be able to demonstrate a really good grip of, and you've got a lot of interesting things to say about. So now, sit back and consider your 4 areas of interest. What links your areas? What do they have in common? Try and think about anything that might bring them together, that might give them some sort of link, and what that says about you. You as a historian, your academic identity, if you like. Now for me, I didn't develop any self-awareness as to my interest in history until probably halfway through my degree or even later. I just picked topics because I liked the sound of them, and I didn't know what linked the different areas of history that I liked. For example, I liked quite a lot of late medieval, early modern history, especially religious ideas, so I liked the Hussites. I liked 19th century sort of history of ideas, especially Darwinism. I always liked the causes of wars, but I was always a bit embarrassed to admit I never liked really studying the war itself, just the causes of the wars. And it took me a very long time to realise what these things had in common. And what they have in common is they're all periods of history that are about big ideas clashing with society, colliding with the mass of people in society, and what kind of result ensues, what sort of chaos quite often ensues. And it took me a very long time to realise this, and when I did, I learned something about myself, and it all made sense to me why there were certain areas of political history, for example, that I really liked, where the politics really came alive, and other areas of political history where I just found it very dry. And it was always when there were big ideas at stake. So have a think about your 4 areas, whatever they are, and see if you can see what unites them. So here's just an example that I've done earlier. There we go. So let's suppose your 4 areas are Tudor rebellions, women in 19th century science, African American soldiers in the American Civil War, and the LGBT community in Manchester in the Thatcher era. So if you think a bit about this, then what seems to me to unite all these topics is an interest in the marginalised. So that may be why you're drawn to those different topics, and once you've identified this, it becomes much easier to link your topics in your personal statement. You can start by saying that you have an interest in the marginalised in societies throughout history, for example, and then give these as illustrations of that. It just makes it much easier to write the personal statement in a way that links your ideas together and gives the tutors the sense that you've already got some kind of academic self-awareness. So if you've got this far, if you've got 4 topics, lots of different books, podcasts, documentaries and so on, and potentially some links between the topics, well done. You have got the bare bones of a very good personal statement. I know we've done nothing about the dreaded first sentence, and not to mention the last sentence, which is possibly even harder. We haven't looked at your other A-level subjects, and we haven't put anything about your extracurricular interests. But most of those, apart from the first and last sentence, are the easy bits. You've broken the back of it, so well done. In the next video we will look at those other bits.